Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really digging into something that, well, a lot of places grapple with, occupational health and safety. How do you actually get it right?
Yeah, it's definitely more than just, checking off boxes on a form.
Right. It's all interconnected, isn't it? The people, the equipment, the tools, how things are done, the policies, and it all feeds back into how the business actually performs.
Absolutely. And what we want to explore in this deep dive is two main ways people approach this. There's systematic management.
hmm
Think of that as the control side.
Getting things orderly.
Exactly. And then there's systems thinking, which is more about, well, understanding the whole system, the knowledge part.
Okay. Now, I know the big standards like ISO 45000, they sort of say these two should work together, right? Synergy.
They do, yeah. But how they actually combine in practice, that often feels a bit murky, unclear.
Yeah, that's the word. Murky.
Yeah.
So that's our mission today, isn't it? To unpack how systematic management, the control, and systems thinking, the understanding can actually live together, maybe even help each other.
Symbiotically, as the paper we're looking at puts it. We're mainly drawing from symbiotic types of systems thinking with systematic management in occupational health and safety.
Great. Okay, so let's start with that first one. Systematic OHS management. What does that actually, look like on the ground?
Well, at its core, it's a very structured, coordinated way of doing things for health and safety.
Structured how?
Think clear policies, solid planning, defined procedures, then how you implement them, measure results, evaluate.
And keep improving.
Exactly. Continuous improvement is key. It's definitely not a set it and forget it kind of thing.
So much more than just a safety manual sitting on a shelf somewhere.
Or absolutely. You need clear responsibilities, who does what. You need employee consultation, getting people involved.
Makes sense.
And then specific program elements like training, inspections, how you report and investigate incidents, identifying hazards before they cause harm.
Prevention.
Right.
Yeah.
And using data, analyzing it, monitoring things, reviewing how it's all working.
Sounds quite dynamic then, always feeding back into itself.
Precisely. It's proactive risk management with feedback loops. And it's interesting, this approach actually comes out of quality management, process engineering.
Ah, okay. Where consistency is king.
Yeah, repeatability, orderly arrangement. That's the focus.
And the PDCA cycle fits in here somewhere, doesn't it? Plan, do, check, act.
It does. It's often seen as the central framework. Plan, do, check, act. It gives structure for that continuous improvement loop. Who does what, when, how, across the whole organization, ideally.
But, and maybe this is where the murky part comes in, can focusing just on that cycle, on being orderly, sometimes miss the bigger, messier picture?
That's a really sharp question. And yes, that's a potential pitfall. Relying only on PDCA can, well, it can oversimplify how complex systems actually behave. The relationships, the interaction.
They don't always follow the plan.
Exactly. And, the research actually points to pretty high failure rates, like 67 to 93% for OHS management systems, built only on those quality management ideas.
Wow, that high.
Yeah. Especially in complex places like, say, healthcare. A standard rigid approach often just doesn't fit. You really need to adapt it to the specific work, the context.
Okay, so that paints a picture of the control side, systematic management. Let's switch gears now to the understanding side. Systems thinking in OHSMS. How would you define that for someone maybe new to the term?
A good working definition is seeing it as a set of skills. Skills to identify systems, understand them, predict how they might behave.
See the connections.
Yes, and then figure out how to nudge them, modify them to get the effects you want. But the crucial first step, always gaining as much knowledge about that system as possible, really understanding it deeply.
So, stepping back, seeing the forest, not just the individual trees.
You got it. And in OHSMS, this often uses what's called a socio-technical systems approach.
Socio-technical, meaning people and tech.
People, processes, technology, yeah. But crucially, how they interact within their environment and context. It's about holistic models, looking at the whole macro system, rather than just simple linear cause and effect chains, like A causes B. It's usually more complex.
I guess the socio part, the people, makes it unpredictable sometimes.
That's a huge part of it. Managing human performance variability, that's a major challenge, especially when you have lots of tightly connected parts in modern systems.
So how does this thinking apply at, say, the management level?
Well, it helps the OHSMS bring different departments together better. HR, operations, logistics, getting them aligned. Finding that balance between safety, yes, but also efficiency, productivity, quality.
It's not just a safety silo.
Absolutely not. It has to be integrated into the bigger business system to really work well. Alignment is key.
Is there a good example of this in practice?
The paper mentions a framework from healthcare called system spiral improvement.
Spiral improvement.
Yeah, it emphasizes continuous improvement again, but through really understanding the system first, then designing changes, delivering them, and making sure they stick sustainability.
Right.
And it considers all the agents, people, tech, processes, environment.
So it's broader, like how ISO 45001 now asks about external factors, interested parties.
Exactly. That reflects this wider systems view. You're not just looking inward.
And what about down at the operational level? How does systems thinking look there?
It encourages things like real two-way communication, not just top-down directives, involving people in designing their own jobs, maybe more decentralized management, even self-managed teams in some cases.
Giving people more ownership.
Yeah, and making the OHSMS adaptable. It needs to be tailored to the specific situation, the business goals, to get real buy-in and adherence.
The paper mentioned a healthcare IT study, too, SIDIG and SING.
Right. That really highlighted how when you're trying to improve complex systems, especially with tech involved, you absolutely cannot separate the people from it.
They're integral.
Totally. You need to understand their workflows, how they actually communicate, what they need to collaborate effectively. Those human connections are vital.
So ultimately, an effective OHSMS has to connect the big picture strategy with the day-to-day reality.
That's it. Integrating the environment, the people, the systems, but in proportions that reflect the unique character of that specific organization. There's no single perfect template.
Though maybe highly tailored systems have their own challenges, like cost.
They can, yeah. Finding that balance is tricky.
Okay, so we have these two approaches, systematic management, systems thinking, different focuses. But are there things they both need to work? Common denominator.
Oh, definitely. Managerial commitment is absolutely fundamental, non-negotiable, really.
Just saying safety is important isn't enough.
Not even close. It needs visible leadership, actively encouraging staff involvement at all levels, providing the actual resources, the funding. Without that top-level buy-in, any system will struggle.
Makes sense. You follow the leader. What about the employees themselves?
Crucial. Valuing and empowering workers. It pays off hugely. Better job satisfaction, better performance, sure. But also, they're more likely to understand and follow the safety procedures.
If they feel valued, they engage more.
Exactly. And their input is vital. Worker participation isn't just nice to have. Their experience from doing the job day in, day out should directly shape safety decisions. They're participants, not just information sources.
A collaborative effort, really.
They has to be. If there's no real participation, it hurts safety, health, even productivity. The paper talks about information bottlenecks.
Bottlenecks, meaning info gets stuck.
Yeah, vital safety info from the front lines doesn't get reported up. Or if it does, it gets ignored. That leads to preventable incidents, obviously, but it also erodes trust. People stop bothering if they think no one's listening, or management isn't serious.
And poor communication generally is a barrier.
A huge one.
Yeah.
Fragmented information, weak links between departments. It really undermines the whole OHSMS.
And this all seems connected to the idea of safety culture, doesn't it?
It is. A systems approach actually broadens how we think about safety culture. It's not just shared beliefs, but also a shared understanding across the organization about the risks, who has authority, how effective the controls are, the underlying processes.
Building that culture sounds like a challenge.
It can be. But things like worker involvement, that leadership support we talked about, good training, open communication, they all help build a positive safety climate.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you need both, a formal system and a culture that supports it. They work together.
Okay, so if an organization does manage to blend these ideas well, what are the payoffs, the benefits, and conversely, what are the hurdles?
The upsides can be really significant. Less worker harm, obviously, lower costs from injuries, illness, improved productivity.
The bottom line benefits.
Yeah, and things like maybe lower insurance costs, fewer legal issues. It can even open up new business opportunities if you get a reputation for safety. Plus, you get clear ways to measure OHS performance, and it boosts your reputation generally.
Why does it lead to all that?
Usually because decisions become more informed, more data-driven. You build a stronger, more safety-conscious culture. And you're demonstrating due diligence, which is important. The systems view gives you that broader perspective for planning, for mitigating risks proactively, for responding effectively when things do go wrong.
Sounds pretty compelling. But are there catches? Challenges.
Well, one thing is that the true effectiveness might only be visible at the whole organizational level. You need to watch the whole system over time, not just isolated metrics.
Seeing the big picture again.
Right. And finding that balance. Controlling variability enough, but allowing enough flexibility, that's a constant tightrope walk. Plus, things are changing, right? Think about precarious employment, fly-in, fly-out work.
Like in Australia.
Yeah, that needs a systems view that looks at worker well-being holistically, even impacts on families. And high-risk industries, they face more scrutiny, so they often get pushed towards really rigorous systematic management to show they're in control.
Which makes sense, but you mentioned earlier that too much control could backfire.
Exactly. There's a danger that intense systematic management just becomes the default, the best practice, even if it doesn't fit the organization's culture or context. The paper warns about organizational dehumanization.
Dehumanization, that sounds serious.
It means, like, if you have excessive rigid policies, super detailed procedures, people can feel like cogs in a machine, not valued individuals. Job satisfaction goes down.
And ironically, all that bureaucracy might make the OHSMS less effective.
It can, yeah. Too cumbersome, too slow to adapt. And then on the flip side, if you try to bring in more systems thinking ideas like decentralization, empowerment, sometimes management resists that. They might see it as losing control, especially in very hierarchical places.
Fascinating. Okay, this sets the stage perfectly. Let's dive into the real core of the paper now. The different ways systematic management, S. Menhanen, and systems thinking, SYSC, can be combined. We use these labels. Excessive, prudent, minimal. Can you unpack those?
Sure. So the key difference to keep front of mind. SYSS is about consistency, reliability, making sure things happen the right way to get predictable results. Enforcing desirable behavior.
Control.
Control. SYS, though, is about understanding why. Understanding the system's dynamics, the interactions, and questioning if the management approach itself is actually valid and effective. Understanding. So SYSM, coming from quality and engineering, tries to minimize variability through clear objectives, the what, and detailed procedures, the who, when, where,
And
how.
breaking things down.
Often, yeah. Decomposition hierarchies using quantitative analysis, tools like fault tree analysis, Six Sigma, audits, inspections. It's all geared towards ensuring compliance and reducing deviation.
Right, minimizing variability. How does SYSN approach variability?
SYS takes a different view. It says, look, you need continuous effort to understand the system more deeply. Interactions create unpredictable emergent behaviors. Human variability is unavoidable. You can't fully control individuals.
So trying to break down a complex socio-technical system might actually lose something.
Can, absolutely. You can lose or misinterpret crucial information because people's behavior is dynamic, influenced by so many things. What happens at the system level might not be predictable just by looking at the parts. So SIF often uses induction, qualitative descriptions, ethnography, observation, interviews, focus groups.
More about uncovering the underlying factors.
Exactly. Though quantitative methods can supplement that, of course. But the paper highlights that there hasn't been much written about how SYSMAN and SYSIS actually intersect in practice as a holistic framework.
So they're proposing a way to think about the combinations, using excessive, prudent, minimal.
Yes. Excessive means a very rigid, almost unquestioning application of one paradigm. Minimal means it's barely present, maybe just lip service. Prudent suggests a more balanced, thoughtful application, recognizing strengths and weaknesses, adapting it.
And they argue some combinations just don't work.
Right. Excessive SYSMAN and excessive SYST. Incompatible. You can't demand zero variance and fully embrace total self-regulation and emergence at the same time.
Makes sense, like oil and water.
Pretty much. And minimal SYSMAN with minimal SYST, well, that's basically no system at all. No coherence, no understanding. Chaos.
Okay, so ruling those out, how do they describe the viable combinations? They link it to objectives and procedures, right?
They do. They use objectives and procedures as observable indicators of how an organization manages variability. Are they trying to control it, more SYSAN, or welcome it, more SYST?
Let's break that down. Objectives first. How are they classified?
Objectives, the goals, policies, targets, are classified by source, direction, and inclusiveness. You got top-down.
Site at the top, push down.
Exactly. Little room for local goals. Then, negotiated mutual agreement, discussion between levels, allows some local objectives alongside the big ones.
A bit more give and take.
Yeah. Then bottom up, starting at lower levels based on local needs, seeking support upwards. And finally, localized, where levels just generate their own objectives without really coordinating or seeking support. Potentially fragmented.
Okay, that covers the what. What about the how, the procedures?
Similar classifications. Top-down procedures, decided high up, imposed downwards. Local practices often rejected unless formally blessed. Negotiated procedures, again, mutual agreement. Finding the best mix of external, transferable, and local practices. Focus on what works, not who thought of it.
More flexible.
Right. Bottom-up procedures. Developed locally based on experience, maybe ignoring wider drivers then pushed up for approval. And localized procedures developed locally, often rejecting outside ideas, no real interest in wider legitimacy, kind of doing their own thing.
Got it. So how do these objective and procedure types map onto the SYSMNSS blends and managing variability?
The mapping basically follows this logic.
Yeah.
The more an organization relies on top-down objectives and procedures, the more it leans towards higher levels of SYSMN and controlling variability.
Makes sense, standardizing everything.
Conversely, the more delegation you see, the more negotiated or bottom-up approaches, the more openness to welcoming variability that points towards higher levels of SYS.
So welcoming variability is linked to understanding and adapting.
That's the idea. The paper uses figures and tables to visually map these combinations, showing how different levels of SESMN, minimal, prudent, excessive, can combine with different levels of SESM, minimal, prudent, excessive, excluding those impossible pairings we mentioned.
And it describes the extremes, too, like excessive SESMN with minimal SYS.
Yeah, that would be very dictatorial, top-down, no room for bottom-up input.
Yeah.
The opposite, minimal SESMN with excessive SYS, would be pretty chaotic, dominated by local needs, little overall structure, less common, perhaps, but possible.
And the combinations in between are characterized by those different objective procedure styles.
Exactly. The specific blend reflects how objectives are set and how procedures are defined and enforced.
Now, where do those common denominators fit in communication, leadership, empowerment? Are they part of the blend?
Not directly part of the mapping itself, no. The paper sees them more as agents of change, or enablers, or barriers, potentially. They're the things that influence how a particular blend functions and whether an organization can shift between blends.
Ah, okay. So good communication could make even a fairly top-down system work better or help it evolve.
Precisely. For example, in a system that's maybe excessive SYSMN, but trying to incorporate prudent SYS, strong communication and feedback loops are absolutely vital to get that local understanding flowing, even if procedures remain quite standardized. These factors make the system responsive.
Right. Okay, this framework of combinations is really interesting. Let's move into the final part, the discussion and conclusions. They start by emphasizing complexity again. Why is that so central?
Because that complexity driven by tech, laws, resources, workforce changes, productivity demands is precisely why we need more tailored, adaptive OHSMS approaches. A simple, off-the-shelf solution just won't cut it anymore in many cases.
The old ways aren't enough.
Often not. And while systems theory offers tools to deal with this complexity, its multidisciplinary nature means there isn't always universal agreement, creating opportunities, but also risks if we misapply the ideas. The paper really focuses on that interplay. S is for understanding, SYSMN for control, and how they show up in practice.
Finding that balance between knowing why things happen and making sure they happen reliably.
That's the crux of it. SYSMN delivers reliable performance in known territory. SYSMN helps us understand the territory better, question our maps, and see the unintended consequences. The novelty here is proposing these specific blends and cross-sections.
And using objectives and procedures as the visible signs of how variability is being welcomed or controlled?
Yes, those are the observable phenomena reflecting the underlying balance. Top-down tends towards SYSMN control, delegation tends towards SYS with understanding.
And those common denominators, communication, leadership, feedback, empowerment, are what make the whole system safer and more responsive.
Absolutely. They're the lubricant, the connectors. They enable learning, adaptation, and importantly, they can help an organization shift its SYSMN-SYS balance over time as needed.
So, while we need more research on specific safety tools within this paradigm, the first step, the paper argues, is understanding how these fundamental approaches, control and understanding, can actually coexist.
And this framework of combinations, it's meant to be a practical tool.
That's the hope. Organizations can use it to understand where they are now and think about where they want to be, considering their size, resources, culture.
But it's not saying everyone should aim for prudent.
Definitely not. That's a key caution. There's no single ideal blend. Systems mature differently, they operate in unique environments, they leverage those common denominators differently. Context is king.
So no one-size-fits-all answer here either.
Nope. And organizations need to think practically about resource allocation. How much effort goes into understanding SYS versus implementing controls, SYS man?
Could different parts of the same organization even need different blends? That's a really interesting point the paper raises. Yeah, maybe. Think about safety criticality or required response times. Higher criticality, less time. Maybe lean more SYS in. Lower criticality, more time for analysis. Maybe more SYS is beneficial there.
And the workforce matters too. Experience levels, diversity.
It can influence the balance, yes. A very diverse or less experienced workforce might initially need more SYS in clear, standardized procedures to establish a safe baseline.
So use the mapping cautiously, with context, no dogma.
Exactly. It's a tool for analysis and strategy, not a rigid set of rules. You can use it to decide where you want to go with variability management and adjust practices, or analyze current practices to understand your current stance on variability.
And the threshold for acceptable variability will change depending on the blend.
It will. What's seen as a problem in a high SYS system might be a learning opportunity in a high SYS one.
And these ideas aren't just for OHS, are they?
No, the principles apply much more broadly. Operational safety, quality, security, productivity. The specific blend might differ, but balancing understanding and control is relevant everywhere.
The authors acknowledge limitations, though, need for more research.
Oh yes, it's primarily conceptual. We need empirical studies on how effective these blends are in reality, what other factors matter, how to tailor it for different organizational sizes. But they hope it's a good starting point for discussion.
Well, this has been incredibly insightful, a real deep dive. If I were to summarize the main takeaway, it feels like managing OHS risk effectively isn't an either between control, SYS man, and understanding, SYS penny. It's about finding that dynamic, tailored balance between them.
That sums it up perfectly. It's about that thoughtful integration adapted to the organization's specific reality.
So for everyone listening, maybe take a moment to think. Where does your organization or a system you know well seem to sit on that spectrum of cis combinations?
And perhaps a final question to ponder. How does that underlying acceptance or rejection of variability, leaning towards control or towards understanding, actually end up shaping the goals and the rules designed for safety and efficiency? Is there a hidden cost to going too far towards either extreme?
Really fascinating questions. We hope this deep dive has given you plenty to think about and explore in your own context. Thanks for joining us.